you don't have enough vocabulary, or you feel like you don't have enough confidence in using vocabulary when you speak or when you use English. And I totally get you. There's so many different words, so many different expressions, idioms. Some words have multiple meanings, 5, 10, sometimes even more. I get this from my students all the time. It also makes it more difficult that for exams you have to know a lot of vocabulary in all kinds of different topics, and you have to be really good at them. Otherwise, if you get a topic that is difficult to talk about, you don't have the vocabulary to use in order to say something about the topic, you will fail. And it's such an important thing to remember that forgetting will actually help you remember more. But I'm going to tell you how that works and 3 different tips that will help you remember words better so you don't forget too many words and vocabulary when you speak English. Hey language learners, my name is Chubby. Welcome to my channel, a channel for English learners who want to learn how to make vocabulary more memorable. That's exactly our topic today as well, with the help of listening and spoken interaction. When you say you don't remember a word or you keep forgetting vocabulary, it just means you've never even known the word in the first place. There's a difference between understanding a word, seeing how it's used in its context, because the context helps you a lot in understanding what you're reading, what you're listening to, and knowing how to use it in context. And traditional education makes us believe that once we understand a word, we kind of know it. But we're going to dive into what it means to actually know a word. And again, I'm going to give you 3 tips on how to make sure that it sticks so much better. If you'd like to see some more information on why we keep forgetting words, ways we can remember, check out this video I made a couple of months ago where you can find out more about this issue. Now, to know a word, we need to know how it's spelled, how it's pronounced, not just in isolation, because that's one of the biggest problems, but we also have to know where the word starts and where it ends when we listen to spoken English. Or we also need to know how the word is related to other words. When I say the word, what other words pop into mind when I can think of it? So let's say if I say the word dog, you might think of walking a dog or dog food or running. All these kind of words are associated with a dog, but this is a simple example. If we go into more complex vocabulary that helps you express more complex topics, it's going to have more complex connections as well. But we also have to think about what form of the word is best to use, for example. So we have to be aware of the noun, verb, or adjective form of the same word. For example, we've got act that can be turned into activate or activity or active as well. And it depends on the context which one we actually use. We also need to know what concept that word covers. Sometimes when we use a word, it has a negative connotation. When you say someone is mean with money, someone is stingy with money, it means that they don't really like to spend money on things. But if you say someone is economical or thrifty, it has a positive connotation, kind of a positive meaning, looking at the person not as someone who's not really ready to pay money in anything or invest in themselves, but in somebody who's trying to save money for the future and think of better ways to spend their money. And last, and it's especially going to be important for you if you want to become more fluent, use new vocabulary, is, surprise, surprise, we need to know how the word is used, as in what verbs, adjectives, nouns it's mostly present with, as in the same context with, and also when we can use it, in what kind of situation, what type of people use it typically, what does it tell about me if I use this expression, let's say slang, idioms, a bad word, a vulgar expression, a more formal expression as well. Where can I use that? What part of the world is it mostly used in? Or is it even used in particular parts of the world? These are all what it means to know a word. And many times we have to remember our brain tries to function in its minimum energy levels. So it's always going to be easier for your brain to choose a word that you already know how to use, which are going to be some of these words that we use on a daily basis. So it's got to be you who make that extra effort while speaking and practicing how to speak, who can make sure you don't forget the words. But again, let's just jump into 3 different ways you can make sure you don't forget the expression. If you'd like to hear more about how to learn vocabulary more effectively, check out this video, and also make sure you have this video in your playlist as well, because we don't want to make all those common mistakes a lot of people make because they have the school experience of studying English. Let's just jump into the 3 different ways you could make sure you remember those words, you don't forget them. But before we jump into the 3 different points, let me just tell you this one huge mistake a lot of struggling learners make, and that's when they ask, what does it mean? And that's the wrong question to ask, because when I tell you what it means, as in I tell you a translation or describe the expression, does it help you actually use the word? Again, when you ask, what does it mean, you focus on understanding the word, not on knowing the word, as in learning more and more about how the word is used. So when we talk about knowing a word, knowing how to use it with confidence, it always comes down to knowing how to use that word. So instead of asking your teacher, asking your classmates you're studying English together with, make sure instead of asking, what does it mean, ask how it's used in context. And that's going to be our first point as well, because actually talking about the words, as in seeing in what context can it be used, can't it be used, how formal it is, what is the kind of connotation with the word itself, what kind of underlying meanings the word has. These are all important things for us to remember when we want to make sure we create those really strong memories. You probably don't remember, but when you learned your first language, I'm absolutely sure the way you learned it was by watching your parents or people around you using the language itself and learning from that context. You never really asked them what it means until later on, but you've still seen how that word was used. So besides what a word means, we always have to think of how it's used, and that's going to help you remember more and use more vocabulary when you speak. If you're looking for the most efficient way for you to make sure you make those really strong memories, is interaction. Because when we interact with other people, we are able to talk about those words. Sometimes if I don't use the right word, that's going to give me feedback that I was using the wrong word, or I was offending someone because I said something. But unless we have someone to talk to, we would never know whether we use the words, expressions, the grammar structures in the correct way or not. And I understand that many people feel like they want to study by themselves because that's what school told us. But don't forget that language is used to interact with other people. And I'm sure you're also interested in using the language in its practical way as well in conversations. But in order for us to be good at conversations, we also need to make sure we know how to talk about those words and we understand exactly what those words, expressions, phrases mean when we use them. If there is no interaction, there's no way for us to know whether we understand the concept of that word and we understand and know how that word is used. Because let's just not forget that the words in your language might overlap in some parts of what they mean in English and how they are used, but not all the time. And I talked about this in some of my previous videos. If you'd like to see more about how interaction can help you and how it's literally the most efficient way for you to improve in English, no matter how scary this all sounds, have a look at this video here. So my advice here is ask questions about a specific expression or a word that you're looking at, you want to learn and activate by asking questions like, where is it on the formal, informal spectrum? Like, is it more formal, less formal, slang, maybe archaic, nobody is using that expression anymore? You could also think about how it's used in context, what difference does it make if you give attention to something or pay attention to something, if there is any difference at all, or just generally ask people who know that word already. So more advanced speakers or your teacher as well, you could ask them how I can use this word. Can I use this word this way? Is it okay to use that word in another way, in the way that I imagine in my mind? And that feedback is going to help you remember and also know how to use that vocabulary. Remember, the focus is always on knowing how to use the vocabulary instead of just understanding it. And just remember, it's totally fine, okay, and actually highly recommended that you ask your teacher or an advanced speaker of English who knows how to use the word these different questions about how I can use a word or how I can't. Now, you might have heard of point number 2 before, which is to learn from context. And if you'd like to see an entire video on how it's done, have a look at this one here. Learning from context doesn't mean that you check every single one of the words you see in text. It's going to be important for us to develop the skill of guessing from context. We have to realize that we don't have enough time to check all the words. That's why instead of wasting that large amount of time with dictionaries, you can focus on keeping on going, keeping on reading, listening, focusing on only the expressions, phrases that matter to you or that matter for us to understand the text. But it's again, instead of focusing on understanding the text all the time, if you want to use that vocabulary in the future, we've got to focus on how to use the vocabulary. And in order for us to do that, we've got to do a little bit of deeper dictionary work, but only with the words or expressions that are important for us to use in future conversations. And this is what a lot of learners don't seem to overcome very easily, because in the 21st century, there's so many distractions around us. It's going to be really hard for us to pay attention, but that's exactly that focused attention, that deliberate attention, staying focused on what we are reading in order for us to use that when we speak or when you write is going to be essential. To learn from context effectively, besides consciously focusing on what you're learning, what you're reading or listening to, it's also going to be important for us to be familiar with the unfamiliar. One of the biggest problems people have is anxiety. They won't use an expression or a word or a grammar structure unless they know it 100% sure. But one thing that's sure about language is that nothing is sure. And in order for us to know more about how to use a word or an expression, we've got to practice using it. We've got to use it in context. We've got to practice in interactions and get feedback on it for us to know whether we use that phrase or expression correctly or not. So one thing is, for example, one thing you can do if you don't know for sure what word to use is use the skill of paraphrasing. This is a skill you can develop. I'm going to have a video on how to paraphrase and how powerful it is to use as a communication tool. But just like in your first language, it's totally fine to describe a word so that people who are listening to you will be able to tell what word you are going to use. So you kind of get away with it without ever revealing that you don't know that word, plus the conversation can go ahead, plus the conversation can continue without anyone realizing you didn't know the word. It's a totally normal, natural way of communicating when we don't know what exact word we'd like to use, or just the word just doesn't come to our mind, or the word just doesn't come to mind. Another thing that's important is don't over-rely on dictionaries. Be okay with just reading the text and really focusing on understanding what it is in the text and thinking of the different clues that there are, because you probably understand the majority of the text you're reading. If you don't, the text might be too difficult for you to read, but you've got to go out there. You've got to make that effort. You've got to go through the struggle in order for you to really learn from context. If people ask me how I learned vocabulary, how many words I learned per day, I couldn't actually tell, because all I did was reading, listening, and interacting with people, either by writing or speaking. So I never really looked at words as individual items of the language, because when you learn from context, without over-relying on a dictionary, for example, you can learn so much more effectively, but you need to get used to that struggle that is involved in the whole process. If you need some more support with this, if you'd like to share your thoughts on that too, I've got an email address down in the description. Feel free to either send me an email or leave a comment here as well. And the last one is going to be probably the most outrageous for you to hear, when I say that forgetting a word is absolutely fine. Because when we forget words, that's just another opportunity for us to review the word, look at what it means, and then how it's used. Again, don't forget to add that. So it's another chance for us to learn that word. And eventually, you build better, stronger memory by remembering, forgetting, remembering, forgetting, and so on. So forgetting is just as much part of the learning process as remembering something. But again, there are different ways you could work around this. I have some other videos you could look at and see how you could make vocabulary more memorable. But again, be okay with forgetting words. This is why interaction is so essential for us, because when you speak and you might see that you don't remember a word, that's gonna be feedback for you that that's a word, an expression, a structure you might want to work on because you don't exactly know how to use it. And that feedback is going to also feed our confidence as well. One thing that you can always do is don't just try to focus on one topic at one time and just do that for like 2 weeks or a month, which is what traditional school does. We keep looking at the same topic and then we get bored with it by the end of the 2 weeks or a month, and then we find it really hard to remember that vocabulary in 2 or 3 months time. So instead of that, try to do something different by changing up the topics more frequently. You can always go back to previous topics to gain that confidence, to provide that opportunity for your brain to review all that stuff. And this way you can make sure you build that fluency and confidence you've always wanted. Again, if you need any advice on that, if you have any questions about this, make sure you leave a comment. And if you liked the video, make sure you subscribe if you haven't yet, leave a thumbs up. And in any way you can support my channel, I would really appreciate your help. Thank you so much for watching this. Again, feel free to get in touch on my other social media platforms or via email. I'd love to see what you think, what different questions this video helped you raise, and I'll be sure to answer all of them. Thank you so much again for watching, for all the support. If you like the ideas, make sure you give this a thumbs up and leave a comment. Any sort of support is truly appreciated on your side. Thank you so much again. Hope you'll have a lovely day full of English immersion, learning from context, and never worrying about forgetting a word. Take care and see you in another video. The word in the first place learned and knowing it. The association and how not to make what we are talking about is what's going to help us. What the hell am I talking? You're young when you play and highly they don't know how to say this. And knowing